My name is Marissa Hale. I was 27 years old, and for a long time, I believed I was living the dream every girl hopes for. People used to look at me and say I was lucky. They saw the white dress, the glittering ring, the handsome husband beside me. They saw the picture of perfection. What they didn't see was the truth that would slowly begin to break me. I grew up in Boise, Idaho. It's not a big city, but it has its rhythm, its quiet streets, its mountain air. My mother passed when I was young. My father worked as a carpenter. He taught me to read at night in the glow of a single lamp, and maybe that's why I always found comfort in books. Working at the public library felt like home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I thought my life would always be simple. I dreamed of a little house, a husband who loved me, children running through the yard. Nothing more, nothing less. And then I met Adrian Cole. He was 31, polished, confident. It was at a charity gala hosted by his family. The Coles were everything mine was not: wealthy, powerful, their name on buildings and campaign posters. I wasn't supposed to stand out there, a librarian in a borrowed dress. But Adrian noticed me. He walked over with that easy confidence, the kind that makes you believe every word. He asked about the book in my hand, though I knew he had never read it. Still, he listened, really listened, or at least, he made me believe he did. Our courtship was like something out of a movie. Flowers arriving at the library desk, dinners at restaurants I could never afford, weekend drives up the mountains, music playing low, the windows down. He had a way of making me feel chosen, as if all my quiet dreams were finally coming true. Within a year, he asked me to marry him. I remember the moment so clearly. We were standing under the lights of the city's Christmas tree, his hand shaking slightly as he slipped the ring on my finger. My heart said yes, before my lips did. I thought I had found the man who would love me forever. The wedding was the kind of event people whisper about. A hotel ballroom glowing with chandeliers, flowers in every corner, a string quartet filling the air with music. I walked down the aisle and saw everyone's faces turn toward us, filled with envy and admiration. My father's eyes were wet with pride. My friends clutched their hands together, as if I had been swept into a fairy tale. And for a brief moment, I believed it too. I believed I was stepping into forever. But forever began to crack much sooner than I ever imagined. At first, it was little things. Adrian would come home late, claiming work at the law firm kept him. He was affectionate in public, always the perfect husband when eyes were on us. But behind closed doors, he grew distant. Our nights together felt hollow. He would kiss my forehead, pull away, and fall asleep at the edge of the bed. I told myself it was stress, that newlyweds needed time to adjust. I swallowed the loneliness like it was my fault. I remember one evening, I set the table for two, lit a candle, tried to bring back the spark I thought we had. Hours passed. The food went cold. Adrian walked in past midnight, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. He smiled, thanked me, but barely touched his plate. He said he was tired, kissed my cheek, and went straight to bed. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at the flickering candle, wondering what I had done wrong. The truth is, I didn't know how to name the feeling yet, but I could sense it. The silence between us wasn't just silence, it was a wall. And each day, that wall grew higher. On the outside, people still called us the perfect couple. At family gatherings, at dinners, at church, they looked at me with admiration. They whispered how lucky I was to marry into the Cole family. They didn't see me lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering why my husband never touched me. They didn't hear the ache in my chest when I smiled and pretended. I told myself to be patient, that maybe Adrian just needed time. Maybe it was stress. Maybe love didn't always feel like the stories I read in books. But deep down, I felt it, a coldness, a distance I couldn't explain. And then came that night. I was lying in bed, waiting for Adrian to return. The house was quiet, the clock ticking louder than it should. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up in the dark. And what I saw, what I read in those glowing words, shattered the last piece of innocence I had left. But that is another part of the story. One message, that was all it took, a glow in the dark, cutting through the quiet of my bedroom, stealing my breath before I even knew why. The room was still. The clock was too loud. I reached for my phone to feel less alone, and instead the ground shifted beneath me. Adrian's name was at the top. Our shared cloud thread had synced again, but this bubble wasn't meant for me, words soft and tender, pet names I had never heard from his mouth, hearts, plans, longing never given to me. The name beneath the messages was Julian. I stared until the letters blurred. My hands were cold, clumsy on the screen. I told myself it had to be a mistake, some glitch, some cruel joke, but the thread went back weeks, late nights, missed dinners, trips that suddenly made sense. I pressed the phone to my chest and tried to breathe. Part of me wanted to rip the house apart, search until every lie collapsed. Another part lay frozen, listening to the tick of the clock, as if silence could slow the truth. By dawn, my eyes burned. The pillow was damp. When Adrian came home, his smile looked like something rehearsed. "You're up early," he said. I held out the phone. My voice was calm in a way that scared me. "Can you explain this?" The smile vanished. The quiet sounded like a lock turning. He sat down, voice breaking. "He's not just a friend." The room tilted. Not dramatic, just enough to tear something inside my ribs. "I need you to listen," he said. So I did. Because I had loved him. He told me he had known for years. He circled the word until he finally said it. "I am gay." The syllables landed heavy. The chairs, the walls, even my wedding ring felt different. He spoke of pressure, his father's shadow, the Sunday dinners, the reputation, the need to be the perfect son. Pretending was easier. A law career, the right wife, the photographs of a perfect life. How long, I asked. "A long time," he whispered. "Before you." I'm sorry. The apology was a coin too small for what he had taken. "Julian," I said. He nodded. "We were together once. I thought marrying you would fix me, but it didn't. It only broke you." A tear slid down his cheek. I had never seen him cry. For a moment I wanted to comfort him, but I stayed still, because I was the one left in the cold. "Did you ever love me?" I asked. He closed his eyes. I wanted to. I tried, but I couldn't. Something folded inside me, not collapse, just careful creasing, like a letter tucked away and forgotten. I turned on the faucet just to hide the sound of grief waking up. "I can't do this right now," I said. He nodded. "I'm sorry, Marissa." I went to the bedroom. The bed looked wrong, too wide, too white. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing until the tightness eased. I didn't call my father. I didn't text Tessa. I told no one. The town was too small, the Cole name too loud. I needed silence before the noise found me. That day dragged like honey. I moved books that didn't need moving, folded and unfolded the same sweater, every action a sentence with no ending. By night, I sat staring at a dress in my closet, glittering like a cruel constellation. I thought about the future me who would remember this moment. Maybe she would know that silence can be a scream, that the body knows before the mind believes. Adrian knocked softly. "May I come in?" I didn't answer. "I'll sleep in the guest room," he said. "Whatever you need. I'll give you space." Space. Bitter and clean. I nodded. He left. The house exhaled. I lay back, hearing the echo of vows we never really lived. For better. For worse. For the truth we never spoke. I wasn't ready to tell anyone. Not yet. So I held my pain close, fragile, afraid to drop it. I once thought love just needed time, candles, patience. But that night I finally understood. What I wanted had never lived here. What I called marriage was a story I had written alone. And yet, as I closed my eyes, I knew something had already shifted. The silence between us would never heal. The weight of the Cole family, the name, the pride, the secrets, they would not protect me, only bury me deeper. And though I didn't know it yet, my steps were already carrying me toward another house, a darker silence, hallways where shadows waited, and kindness had a price. But that would come later. For now, I lay in the dark, phone face down, the glow gone, and with it, the last thin thread of the life I thought I had. I once thought the deepest wound in my life was being married to a man who lied about who he was. But I was wrong. The truth is, pain takes many shapes, and sometimes the shape it takes wears a smile, speaks softly, and hides behind the name of family. After Adrian's confession, I could not stay in our small house alone. The walls pressed in on me. Every shadow reminded me of messages I was never meant to see. So I accepted the only place left open to me, the Cole estate. His family's house was enormous, full of polished wood and cold marble floors that echoed even the smallest steps, but nothing about it felt like safety. It was a museum where warmth had been locked away long before I entered its halls. Adrian was often gone. He buried himself in work and excuses and silence. That left me with Douglas, his father, a man everyone in town respected, admired, feared a little. To the world, he was generous, powerful, unshakable. To me, he began to show another face. At first, it was only words, keen observations delivered with a lingering gaze. "Marissa, you are so beautiful," he said, once his eyes steady on mine. "From the very first moment I met you, I knew you were different, special." I smiled politely because what else could I do? But inside, something shifted. The way he said it wasn't like a father-in-law speaking to his son's wife. It was softer, almost hungry. He liked to compare me to Adrian. "You deserve more than what my son can give," he murmured one evening while we stood near the library shelves. "Adrian is weak, too timid. He doesn't know how to take care of a woman like you." His words burned not because they were entirely untrue, but because of the way he spoke them, with a suggestion curled inside every syllable, as if he alone knew what I needed, and as if he intended to provide it. At dinner, he would linger too close when passing the dishes. In the hallway, his hand brushed my shoulder longer than necessary. Once in the kitchen, I felt his fingers tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture that should have been fatherly, but instead sent a wave of cold down my spine. The first time I realized it wasn't just harmless was a night Adrian was away. The house was quiet, only the low hum of the refrigerator keeping me company. I sat at the counter with a cup of tea when Douglas entered. He smiled warmly, almost kindly. "You shouldn't sit here alone," he said. His voice was gentle, persuasive. "You deserve company, someone who truly sees you." I answered with a stiff smile, hoping he would leave, but instead he stepped closer, resting his hand on the back of my chair. "Marissa," he whispered, "I could give you a real family, a child of your own, something Adrian will never give you." The words struck like ice. I froze, unable to breathe. Was he truly saying what I thought he was saying? His face was calm, his eyes full of a certainty that terrified me. When I stood quickly trying to escape to the sink, his hand caught my arm. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to remind me of the imbalance between us. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, leaning closer. "You're too precious to waste your life waiting for a man who cannot give you happiness." I pulled away, muttering something about being tired, and fled to my room. Behind the locked door, I pressed my back to the wood, trembling. I felt dirty, trapped, violated without even being touched the way he wanted. But it didn't stop there. The next days grew worse, a hand lingering at my waist when he passed behind me in the hall, a squeeze on my shoulder that felt more like a claim than comfort, and always the words, "You're special, you deserve more. I could give you what he never can." One afternoon, when I thought the house was empty, I curled on the sofa in the sitting room with a blanket. The door opened without a knock. Douglas entered. And when he saw me, his smile widened. He sat too close, his thigh brushing mine through the blanket. My body went rigid. I shifted away, but he followed. His arm slid around my shoulders. "Don't be frightened," he whispered. "I only want to hold you, to show you how much you mean." The scent of his cologne suffocated me. The heat of his breath against my hair made me sick. I twisted free, stammered some excuse, and hurried to my bedroom. I locked the door this time. But locks mean little when the man who frightens you is the master of the house. The worst came late one night. I had retreated to my room. Lights dimmed, trying to escape into restless sleep. A sound at the door jolted me awake. The handle turned slowly. Douglas stepped in without permission. His shadow stretched across the carpet. "Marissa," he said softly, "you don't need to be alone. Let me stay with you." He moved closer to the bed. I sat up, my voice shaking. "You shouldn't be here." He only smiled. "Don't push me away. I can give you a future, a real family, a child you can hold in your arms." His hand reached for mine. I pulled back, heart pounding, every nerve screaming danger. Finally, I found the strength to say it louder. "Get out!" Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not shame, but a cold warning. And yet he left. He pulled the door closed behind him, leaving me shaking in the dark. I thought the betrayal of my husband had shattered me. But this was something different. Adrian's lie had broken my trust. Douglas's presence poisoned my very sense of safety. I was not just unloved, I was hunted, inside the walls of my own family home. That night I pressed my back against the door until dawn. My hands trembled, my heart would not slow. Every corner of the house felt like a trap, and his words echoed in my head like a curse. Sweet promises twisted into shackles. I knew then the Cole estate was not a refuge. It was a cage, and the man who held the key was watching me with hunger disguised as tenderness. I thought the hardest part had been surviving Douglas's words, his hands that lingered too long, his eyes that stripped the air from my chest. But I was wrong. The hardest part was telling the truth and realizing no one would believe me. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, my throat raw, though I had not spoken yet. Adrian was there, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled, looking tired, but still so carefully put together. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that even if the world turned against me, my husband would not. "Adrian," I said. My voice was thinner than I wanted. Something happened. He frowned, leaned closer. But instead of concern, I saw impatience flicker across his face. I told him every detail, how his father's voice slid into my ear with false sweetness, how his hands brushed my hair, how the promises sounded like chains. When I finished, Adrian just stared, and then he laughed, not cruelly, but in disbelief. "Marissa, you've been under so much stress," he said. "You're imagining things. My father wouldn't, he couldn't." The words landed like stones. I begged him to listen, to see the fear in my eyes. But the more I pleaded, the more he pulled away. His face hardened. He said I was twisting things, that maybe I resented his family and needed someone to blame. That night I learned what betrayal really was. Not only a husband who could not love me, but a husband who chose not to believe me. I thought maybe Evelyn would understand. She was a woman, a mother. Surely she would know what it meant to be cornered, to feel hands where they didn't belong. I went to her in the kitchen, the silver teapot gleaming between us. I whispered my truth, shaking, hoping she would reach across the table. Instead, she placed the lid gently on the pot and looked at me with eyes like polished glass. "Marissa," she said, "you must not speak of this again. Think of the family. Think of Adrian's future." Her voice was steady, not unkind, but firm. The voice of someone who cared more for a last name than for the woman wearing it. I tried again. I said I was afraid. That Douglas's words were not just compliments, but threats. That he had promised me a child that was not Adrian's. Evelyn's lips tightened. She told me to stay silent, that protecting the Cole name was my duty now. Her dismissal was sharper than any slap. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scold. She simply erased me. When Douglas came to me later, I knew he had already won. He stepped into the hallway where I stood frozen. His smile was soft, almost paternal, but his words curled like smoke. "You've spoken," he said. "I know." He leaned closer. His hand brushed my arm as if by accident. "Do not be afraid. If you just accept what is, I can give you everything. A real family. A child. The life Adrian will never give you." His whisper turned colder. "But if you open your mouth again, you will regret it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I stood there silent while his shadow covered me. After that, the house itself seemed to turn against me. Adrian grew distant, avoiding my eyes. Evelyn watched me as though I were a problem to be managed. And Douglas lingered. Always near, always too close. I felt trapped inside walls that looked grand from the outside, but inside were nothing more than a cage. The carpets muffled my steps. The portraits watched as I walked by, and I carried my fear like a secret no one wanted to touch. Every night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps in the hall. My skin crawled at every creak of the wood. I dreamed of hands reaching through doors, of whispers sliding beneath the crack of light. The worst part was not the fear. It was the silence, the knowledge that my truth had no place here, that my voice had been weighed, measured, and discarded. I thought of my father, of Tessa, of the women at the library who would have wrapped me in blankets and made me tea. But I couldn't call them, because this family was loud, powerful. And if I dared to speak outside these walls, I knew the whispers would not paint me as the victim. They would call me unstable, ungrateful, the liar. So I kept it inside. I smiled when I had to. I moved through the days with a hollow mask. And every time Douglas's gaze brushed against me, I felt smaller, more fragile, until I wondered if one day I would disappear entirely. I once believed marriage meant protection, that being a wife meant belonging somewhere safe. But here I was, a bride in a beautiful house, trapped in air that tasted like ash. The truth was simple, cruel, undeniable. I was alone, and worse, I was surrounded. That is when the thought first came to me. Quiet, but sharp. The thought that if no one would believe me, then I would need to find a way to protect myself. If I didn't have proof, my words would be buried forever. That thought kept knocking, soft at first, then louder, until it was all I could hear. Anger lived in me now, hot and bright. Fear lived there too, colder, quieter, but always watching. I was angry because I had been lied to. I was afraid because I was still here, inside a house where a man felt entitled to my body. Both feelings pulled at me, tore at me, and then began to braid into something stronger. I texted Tessa and asked to meet. We chose a small cafe off a side street where the booths were high and the music was low. When I slid into the seat, my hands shook so badly I had to tuck them under my thighs. Tessa studied my face without a word. "Tell me," she said at last. I told her everything. Adrian not believing me, Evelyn asking for silence, Douglas with his soft voice and his hands that would not learn the word no. As I spoke, I heard myself breathing, shallow, quick, like I was afraid the air would run out. Under the fear rose a steady burn. "He lied to me," I said. "He put me in that house and left me there." Her jaw tightened. "You were betrayed," she said, "and now you are being hunted." I waited for her to say we should go to the police, to say we should go to a lawyer, to say anything that would end this by morning. Instead, she leaned in and lowered her voice. "Listen to me. If you want out, if you want safety, you need proof, not tears, not stories. Proof." My chest ached. I hated that she was right. I hated that it was not enough to tell the truth. What kind of proof, I asked. Her eyes did not waver. You know the answer. Record him. Capture what he says and what he does. Make the house speak for you. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. The idea scared me, but my fear was already here, and it had not saved me. Anger lifted its head. If he dares to touch me again, let the world see. When I left the cafe, the sky was the pale gray of snow that never falls. I drove with both hands tight on the wheel and felt something shift inside me. A small room opening, a door in the corner of my chest unlocking. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind comb through the trees. I pictured the kitchen, the living room, my bedroom that never felt like mine. I mapped the angles in my head, the shelves, the lamps, the places where an eye could hide and watch. I was shaking, but it was the kind of trembling that happens before a race. Fear was still there. Anger was steering. I ordered what I needed online. Small cameras, tiny batteries, nothing that would draw a glance. When the packages arrived, I carried them upstairs like contraband, heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my gums. I locked the door and opened each box on the bedspread. Black ovals, threads of wire, a red dot that would blink to say, I am here. I told myself a story to keep my hands from shaking. This is not a trap. This is a mirror. You are not hunting him. You are calling the truth by its name. I started with the living room. On the bookcase, there was a carved bowl no one ever used. I tucked the first camera behind it, angled toward the sofa where he liked to sit too close. I breathed in, breathed out. The red light blinked once, then slept. In the kitchen, I chose the top shelf of the corner cabinet, the one that faced the long stretch of counter, where he loved to lean and watch me make tea. I climbed on a chair, palms slick, and pressed the lens into the seam between wood and wall. From down below, it was invisible. From up here, I felt like I was learning a new language, the language of self-rescue. My bedroom was last. I stood with the small camera in my palm and stared at the lamp on my nightstand. My stomach knotted. This was the room where I had locked the door and still felt unsafe. I unscrewed the shade and set the lens inside the hollow of the base, tilted toward the door, the bed, the space he wanted to claim. When I flipped the switch, a faint glow warmed the fabric. No one would ever know, but I would know. And for the first time in weeks, that meant something. The waiting began. I moved through the house as if nothing had changed. I boiled water. I folded towels. I watched the afternoon light move across the floor and disappear. At night, I lay in bed with my heart counting time. Every sound made me jump, and yet I forced myself to stay where I was. If he came, the house would see him. The first days gave me only fragments, his voice in the living room drifting past me like mist. You are so beautiful, he said once, standing too close. I do not understand why Adrian neglects you. On the screen later, I would watch his eyes slide over me, lazy and certain, like a hand. I paused the frame and tasted metal in my mouth. Another night, the kitchen camera caught his fingers grazing my shoulder as he reached past me for nothing at all. I watched myself stiffen. I watched him smile. You deserve better, he murmured. His words were sugar wrapped around a blade. I saved each clip to a folder with a name only I knew. Anger warmed me as I worked. Fear cooled me when I slept. Between them was resolve, a narrow road, but it was a road I could walk. In the quiet moments, I argued with myself. What if they say I provoked him? What if they say I misunderstood? What if they say the cameras are a betrayal? Then the answer would rise up like a tide. They already called me a liar. They already asked me for silence. If I do nothing, I am the one betraying myself. On the fourth evening, I was in the living room arranging books when he came in. He did not know that the bowl on the shelf was watching. He stood near me, so near I could count the lines around his mouth. His voice was warm, almost tender. You are wasted in this house, he said. Come to me when you are ready to stop pretending. His hand reached for my hair and brushed it back from my cheek. I swallowed and stepped away. The camera saw everything. So did I. Later, alone with my laptop, I watched the scene again. I watched it twice. Then I watched it a third time until my hand stopped shaking. "There you are," I whispered to the screen. "Not a rumor, not a story. A fact. That night I slept for an hour straight. It was not peace, but it was the first breath I had taken that did not scrape my lungs. I was still afraid. Afraid of his footsteps. Afraid of doors that opened at midnight. Afraid of the power he carried in his voice and in his name. But under the fear, the anger kept burning, clean and bright, reminding me who I was before all this. A woman who survived things. A woman who learns. In the morning, I brushed my hair before the mirror and met my own eyes. "You are not safe yet," I told the woman, looking back. "But you are not helpless. You are building a bridge out of here, one truth at a time." The house hummed softly around me. The cameras slept and woke, slept and woke, like small hearts in the walls. I moved through the rooms with careful steps and a quieter breath. I could almost hear Tessa's voice, make the house speak, make it impossible to look away. I poured tea and watched the steam lift. I held the cup in both hands until the heat steadied me. Then I walked to the window and let the morning light fall across my face. For the first time since I entered this place, I felt the edge of a future, a thin line on the horizon. Not bright yet, but real. If I didn't have proof, my words would be buried. Now the proof had begun, and with it, the path out. That night I could not sleep. The house was too quiet, too heavy, like it was holding its breath. I lay in bed with the lamp off, the curtains drawn, my body tense under the sheets. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe he would stay away tonight. But deep down I knew the way you know when a storm is rolling in. Even before the first flash of lightning, the floor creaked in the hall, soft, deliberate. My heart slammed so hard, I thought it would break through my ribs. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my breathing even, though every part of me wanted to bolt for the door. The handle turned, slow, careful, and then the door opened, just enough for the glow of the hallway light to slip inside. His shadow stretched across the carpet, tall, crooked, spilling up the wall like something that didn't belong in this world. Douglas stepped in, not rushing, not fumbling, but calm, like he had every right to be there. I squeezed my hands into fists under the blanket. The camera's tiny light was hidden, invisible to him. It was the only thing that kept me from screaming. He whispered my name, "Marissa." The sound of it in his mouth made my skin crawl. He came closer, sitting on the edge of the bed as if this were natural, as if he belonged in the dark beside me. His hand brushed my hair. "You're so beautiful," he said softly. "The first time I saw you, I knew you were different." I froze, every muscle stiff, my lungs refusing to work. He leaned closer, his breath hot against my cheek. "Adrian is weak," he whispered. "He cannot give you what you deserve, but I can give you a real family, a child of your own." My stomach turned. His words were sugar-laced with poison. A promise, but really a trap. I wanted to shove him away, to scream until the walls shook, but I stayed still because the camera was watching, because this was my chance to finally make them believe me. His hand slid down, from my hair to my shoulder, lingering, pressing too firmly. I flinched under the blanket, pulling it tighter against me, whispering that I was tired, that I needed to rest. But he only chuckled, low, satisfied. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said. "I'll take care of you. You'll see." The mattress dipped as he leaned closer, too close. I turned my face away, biting back the tears that burned behind my eyes. When his hand reached lower, brushing against my waist, I bolted upright, clutching the blanket to my chest. "Please," I whispered. "I need to sleep." Something in my voice must have stopped him. He studied me in the dark, his eyes glinting with something between desire and warning. Then he stood, straightening his jacket, adjusting his cuff like nothing had happened. At the door, he paused. "You'll come around, Marissa," he said softly. "One day you'll see that I'm the only one who can give you the life you deserve." And then he was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. I leapt from the bed, fumbling for the hidden recorder, for the small red light that had been my only ally. My hands shook as I pulled the memory card free, as if it might vanish if I didn't hold it tight enough. I opened my laptop, heart pounding, and loaded the footage. There it was, every word, every touch, the shadow at the door, the promises that curdled in the air, the way his hand moved across me. Proof, not whispers, not just my word against theirs. Proof. Tears blurred my vision, hot and endless. I pressed a hand to my mouth to muffle the sob that escaped. It was horror and relief tangled together, the fear of what he had tried to do, and the small, fragile victory of knowing I finally had something to fight back with. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest spark of control. I was still trapped in this house, still surrounded by silence and disbelief. But now I held a weapon, and no matter how much they tried to erase me, no matter how many times they told me to keep quiet, I had captured the truth. I sat there until the sun began to bleed through the curtains, the card clutched in my fist, the laptop still glowing on the nightstand. The fear was still inside me, sharp and heavy, but it sat beside something else now, anger. An anger I realized could keep me standing. That morning I whispered to myself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." Because the moment he opened that door, the moment the camera caught his shadow, everything changed. I was no longer just the woman they refused to believe. I was the woman with proof. And proof could burn their perfect house to the ground. I remember the weight of the USB in my hand. It was so small, so light, and yet it carried the proof of everything I had endured. For weeks, I had been dismissed, gaslit, silenced. But now I had his voice, his hands on camera, his promises dripping with poison. It was no longer just my word against theirs. It was truth carved into pixels. I went to Tessa first. She hugged me tight, then pulled back, her eyes fierce. "This changes everything," she said, "but you can't do this alone. I'll put you in touch with someone I trust." That someone was a lawyer with gray temples and steady eyes. When I placed the USB on his desk, my fingers trembled. He slid it into his laptop, pressed play, and for 3 endless minutes silence filled the room. Only the sound of Douglas's voice on the recording, low and vile. When the screen went dark, the lawyer exhaled. "This," he said slowly, "is evidence that can destroy a man. Destroy a man." The words hung heavy in the air. I wanted justice, but I also wanted freedom. And I knew freedom would not come from a courtroom battle that could stretch for years. It would come from leverage, from forcing their hand. So we arranged the meeting. It wasn't at the Cole estate. It wasn't in some public office either. It was in a rented conference room. Neutral ground. A table too shiny. Walls too bare. A place that smelled of paper and fear. I walked in with my lawyer at my side. Across the table sat the Coles, Douglas with his jaw tight, a storm brewing in his eyes. Evelyn composed, her pearls gleaming like armor. And Adrian, my husband, looking everywhere but at me. We sat. The air was thick. No one spoke at first, so my lawyer broke the silence. He set the USB gently on the table. "Inside this drive," he said, "are recordings no one would want the public to hear." Douglas's hand twitched. His knuckles went white against the polished wood. "You're bluffing," he spat. My lawyer pressed play. And once again, Douglas's own voice filled the room. Soft at first, coaxing, then sharper, more desperate. Promises of children, touches that weren't invited, words that couldn't be explained away. Evelyn's face drained of color. Adrian buried his head in his hands. And Douglas, for the first time, had nothing to say. When the clip ended, the room was silent except for the hum of the air vent. My lawyer leaned forward. "We do not want a trial," he said. "But if you force her hand, if you dismiss her again, then the public will hear every second of this. And when they do, Mr. Cole's career, his reputation, his legacy will vanish." Evelyn was the first to speak. Her voice cracked, but she tried to sound calm. "What do you want?" I lifted my chin. "I want my freedom. I want a divorce. And I want compensation for what I endured. Enough to leave and start over. Far away from this house. This family. This cage." Douglas slammed his hand against the table. "You think you can extort me?" But his wife placed a hand on his arm, whispering something sharp. She knew. She understood the cost of pride. The negotiation was tense. My lawyer did the talking. I sat there, my pulse pounding, trying to breathe as the numbers slid back and forth. At last an agreement formed. Brittle and bitter, but real. They would give me a settlement large enough to walk away, and in return, I would keep the footage from the public eye. It wasn't justice, it wasn't triumph, but it was escape. The papers were drawn up. Adrian signed with shaking hands, his eyes wet but distant. Evelyn signed too, her lips pressed thin. Douglas hesitated, then scribbled his name with fury as though the ink itself betrayed him. When it was my turn, my hand steadied. I signed, and in that stroke I severed myself from the Cole name, from the marriage that was never real, from the house that had been a prison dressed as a home. When the meeting ended, I walked out first. The hallway felt brighter, the air cooler. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Douglas's low growl, Evelyn's hushed whisper, Adrian's silence, but none of it mattered anymore. I had not won, not exactly, but I had survived. And survival was its own kind of victory. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight of the USB still in my pocket. A secret weapon. A silent witness. Proof that I had not imagined it. Proof that I was not crazy. Proof that my voice mattered even when no one wanted to hear it. That day, I walked away with more than money. I walked away with my freedom. And the knowledge that even in the darkest rooms, even when everyone turns their back, the truth still has a way of clawing into the light. And though I didn't yet know where my road would lead, I promised myself one thing. I would never again let anyone decide what I was worth. Not a husband, not a family name, not a man with too much power and too little conscience. I was Marissa Hale, and at last, I belonged to myself. I used to think endings came with fire, with shouting, with slammed doors that left cracks in the walls. But mine came quietly, with a pen in my hand and a line of ink across the bottom of a page. My marriage, just a few short years, ended with my signature. Adrian sat across the table, eyes lowered, not angry, not even sad, just absent. It was almost worse than rage, because rage means something still burns, and there was nothing left here to burn. The lawyer's voice was steady. The folder closed. The paper slipped into place. And just like that, it was done. When I stepped outside the office, the sky felt too wide. The air pressed against me. Cars rushed by. People hurried past with coffee cups and phones. The world kept moving forward as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had changed. I returned to the house one last time, not to stay, but to gather what was mine. A few books, a framed photo with my father, the scarf Tessa gave me years ago. The walls looked polished, immaculate, but I could still hear the echoes of nights when fear pressed against them. I placed the key on the counter, my hand trembling for just a second. And then I left. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I unlocked my own apartment door. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender. The windows streaked with light. The floor creaked under my steps. But it was mine. No footsteps trailing me, no shadows at my back, just silence. And silence this time felt like freedom. I unpacked slowly, sweater by sweater, book by book. Each object felt like I was building a spine inside myself again. I lit a candle on the kitchen table and watched the flame flicker. It was fragile, unsteady, but alive. The next morning, I went back to the library. The shelves stood tall, filled with their quiet dignity. Dust floated in sunlight, each speck a tiny reminder that life keeps moving. And nothing stays still forever. I let my hands drift across the spines of books, feeling their weight, their promise. This place had always felt safe, but now it felt like an anchor pulling me back to myself. People smiled when they saw me. No one asked about Adrian. No one whispered about the Cole family. Here I was, just Marissa again, not a wife, not a prisoner, just me. And as I checked in books, guided children to fairy tales, helped students find their history shelves, I felt something return, something I thought I had lost forever, myself. Some nights I still wake up shaking. I see Douglas's shadow in the doorway. I hear Evelyn's voice telling me to stay silent. But I also hear another voice now, my own, telling me I got out, telling me I survived, telling me I am still young, still breathing, still free to choose again. The money from the settlement sits quietly in my account. It's not wealth, it's not power, it's possibility. Enough to know I will never be cornered again. Enough to give me courage to dream of something better. Sometimes I stand at the library window when the sun is low. The sky softens into gold and violet. And I think of the girl I was when I first walked into the Cole house, naive, hopeful, desperate to be loved. I ache for her, but I forgive her, because she didn't know yet that love without truth is only a costume. I whisper to her in my mind, "You survived, you learned, and now what then? You will choose differently." One day, I believe there will be someone who looks at me without masks, without shadows, without lies. Someone whose touch won't feel like ownership. Someone whose promises won't taste like chains. Someone who will see me, not what I can protect, not what I can give away, but simply me. Until that day comes, I will still be enough. Until then, I will wake each morning, open the library doors, breathe in the scent of paper and ink, and know that this life is my own. My marriage lasted only a few years, but it carved a lesson so deep it feels like bone. Never again will I trade my voice for silence. Never again will I let fear sit at my table. I am Marissa Hale. I am young still, and I promise myself this. The next time love finds me, it will be real. And this time, I will choose right. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for holding these words with me, for giving space to a truth that was once buried. If my voice reached you, if my journey stirred something in your heart, leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt. Tell me what you would have done, or simply let me know that you hear me. Because every word you give back reminds me that I am not alone anymore. And if you want to walk beside me through more stories like this, stories of betrayal, survival, and the courage to begin again, then stay. Subscribe, share, and lend your voice to mine. This chapter has closed, but I am still writing the next one. And maybe, with your support, I will not have to write it alone.